Hello and welcome to the aForm show. My name is Alan George and thank you very much for tuning in. Each week, we sit across from thought leaders and change makers in the architecture and design space of the GCC. We dive deep into their experiences, both professionally and personally, and share their valuable insight as to what makes them tick. Our goal is to add value to your day and help you navigate your own personal creative journey. Finally, the opinions and the views of the guest speakers are that of their own. They do not necessarily represent the views and the opinions of the show or the host. Welcome to the aForm show. On this week's episode, we are joined by Raha, Milani and Maryam, Karji, co-founders of ArchiSense Studio, an interdisciplinary design firm based right here in Dubai. Since establishing their practice in 2018, this dynamic duo have gone on to developing a portfolio of work in contemporary architecture, interior design and landscaping. With a focus on residential and commercial projects, their work seamlessly integrates cultural and local relevance with modern design elements. We are very excited to have them on the show with us. So without further ado, let's get into it. Good morning, Raha and Maryam. How are we today?
Good morning.
Good morning. Hi. How are you? How's everything?
Everything is good. Everything is good. So obviously, before we started off air, one of the conversations we had was about your studio and the location of your studio. So I want to give our listeners who maybe have not heard of ArchiSense Studio a bit more context. So maybe Raha, if you can start, maybe give us a little more history as to what ArchiSense is, how it was founded, what are you guys doing right now, kind of bring our listeners up to speed.
Sure. First, I want to appreciate your interest and your invitation for listening to our stories and getting to know more about ArchiSense. I just want to mention that in these 3 years, we've been quite invisible in any sort of virtual platform, social media, and etc. So hopefully this podcast will somehow bring another dimension of ArchiSense to be explored and presented, and will be fun. I hope so. So ArchiSense Studio, we are located, just to give you a context, that we are locating in a rooftop, basically, of a residential building that has quite a good decent size of space as a studio, to have a good environment as a team to work on different projects, whether it's going to be more physicality aspect of it, to do any sort of massing study, etc., or it's something that more is individual work, people being on their laptops and at the same time having clients and sometimes having different sub-consultants in our office to discuss the projects. So we are mainly now working on residential project, private villas. And I think the way it started getting project was more like word of mouth, from one project to go to another project and etc. And it's just expanding from just one friend that she knows, and then it just somehow extends out.
Right.
And maybe it would be more interesting if I give a little bit brief about myself. I'm originally Iranian, and I've been studying and working in UAE for the past 11 years, since 2010. I started studying interior architecture back in Iran, and then I moved here, studied architecture in American University of Sharjah. And then right after my graduation, I started, working, and my work experience literally started from that point. But those years of working, I would say it was one of those, transitional stage of my life that I started to question my personal values towards my life and my work and my future career. So working on mainly in private villas at Naga Architects, and being able to engage with different stages from concept to construction stage, working with different designers, witnessing their set of minds, visions and perspectives. They all somehow gave me the courage and confidence to follow my very original and instinctive desire and my plan, which was to have my own independent design team and practice. And maybe this is because I've been very independent person since I was very young, and maybe that is something that's subconsciously just directed me to a place that I am now. So I love learning. I enjoy failing as much as I do like succeeding.
I think that's something which maybe our listeners need to hear again, that you need to love failing more than you love successes. Because I think that ironically makes you more successful, doesn't it? If you tend to love failures and you fail more, you tend to in the long run succeed more.
And confident and thankful about the outcome of that failure.
Absolutely.
To succeed. And I would say another reason that kind of pushed me to do this shift of employee to go through a more like entrepreneur direction was when I was working back to that time, I started realizing that I'm more interested in maybe becoming architect than doing architecture, because I found that being architect is more, and it requires more set of comprehensive skills and ideologies. Like to me, it's more like movie versus director. A good movie, it's not only based on having a good technicality or script or cast.
Right.
It's more about, the director who is the main figure that is trying to put all these disciplines and sectors together in order to serve and respect his own perception and reasons, and just the film is a medium for them to deliver that. And for me, being an architect is somehow, it's kind of a narrator person, like character or maybe reinterpreter, that we try to learn things, imagine things, understand and reflect that, we interpret that. And this happens in very early stage when you talk to a client, you listen to them, and that narrative starts from there, and then you carry on and you translate it to a life project.
Right.
So, and then maybe Maryam, I can ask her to move on.
Sure.
This is Maryam Karji, an interior architect, wife and mother. I graduated as well from American University of Sharjah in 2017 with a bachelor degree in interior design. I always had this dream while I was studying of establishing a firm at a very early stage. It led me to be more curious about how the whole system works, how I can get projects, how I can get more clients and so on. I always used to go to sites that were under construction, ask the engineer and get the information, who is doing this, who is the contractor and the suppliers and so on. And right after my graduation, with support of my family and husband, I started as a freelancer. It was about a year almost that I entered the market. And when I got more confidence, it was the time where I said, okay, I need to grow more. I need to find the right team. And it was there, the first person who came to my mind was Raha Milani. I just picked the phone up and I called her. I said, hey Raha, I have projects and I need your help. Just come and join. And by that time she was in Iran, right?
Yeah, I moved out.
Yes. So I called her. I said, let's have a meeting, come back. And she came. It was the right move at the right moment. We found it out that we have very similar visions and interests in our future career and the way we are imagining our practice to be. So, and this is when ArchiSense was born. And we have been working together on different projects for about more than 3 years, right? Yes. So this was the story of ArchiSense and how we established ArchiSense.
And we started with a few people, and it changes, depending on the number of projects, the scope of work. So the number of group, it wasn't something very fixed structure, and it's changing still.
Okay. So. All right. For anyone who's seen your work, and I'm a big fan, I must say, it's very clear that you, as a practice, have a very clear stance on contemporary design, which I think is all the rave now. I think it's kind of finally coming into style again. Good contemporary design, it can go wrong very easily, but to do it correctly is being valued by clients. So I maybe want to touch upon the design stance of your studio. Get a client. What's your kind of workflow like? Do you start off with, a kind of initial meeting? How would a client kind of interact with you as an office as during the entire life cycle?
So I would say that when we sit with a client in a very first meeting, we just, again, back to that narrative that needs to be started. We just try to first listen to their ideas, the way they're imagining, and try to dig into more to understand the personal values when it comes to living, like inhabiting a space or the lifestyle. Most of families, they come from a different status. They live maybe with the parents, in a different kind of environment. And now they want to do their own private villas with set of, requirements and desires. So we try to understand them, listen to them, and try to see if it's something that would be easy for us to move forward and develop that dream in terms of values. Again, for us, their values is something that would make us to do this evaluation. And this happens also through the question survey 1-to-1. We, based on the experience we had working on different projects, working with different families, we somehow set out our very specific questions list. And we try to ask them these questions to understand if they are also clear about how they're imagining, how they want the project to be, or they are a bit lost, or they don't know how much they want. So for us, this clarity is very important in the very initial stage. And of course, when it comes to a contemporary project, I don't know myself what is contemporary project is. It's something that I think it's not something very constituted when it comes to typology, and it changes and it keeps changing. Like now we are again going back to some other, previous styles of architecture. Now, the reflection of them is coming back. So the design process would be our kickoff meeting with client to have their brief. And if we see that we are on the right track in terms of their demands, their needs, their requirements, and the budget, of course, because sometimes clients, they come with so many requirements, but they don't have enough budget that would fit in the image they are looking for. So, and then we move on to concept stage that is more focusing on planning and requirement. It's more dependent on requirements. So we try to make sure that we can find proper and concrete outline of a project that would suit architecture and interior at the same time. And then we move to design development and trying to add more layers and complexity to the project.
Right.
But most of the time, the project we receive, they include the scope of interior as well.
So you sort of develop both of them at the same time as you go forward.
Yes.
It's not that you finish the architecture, then do the interior.
I think we believe that architecture and interior design is something that is very inseparable and somehow in sort of democratic in a way that one cannot dictate the other or disregard. They need to complement and inspire each other. True. Sometimes, for example, we work in a project that the architecture is the core of the project that would inspire the interior to be shaped and characterized. Right. For example, if it's a specific type of massing that we want to achieve, and that would influence the interior. Right. Or there is a specific sort of structure that again would influence the interior. Or on the other hand, maybe there is a specific interior space and image that the client comes to us, and that would be the driven point for us to start the architecture.
Right.
So there is this, for us, the workflow, I would say it's very parallel, and there is this constant back and forth between architecture and interior from concept to the construction stage. And just throughout the stages, we try just to give more complexity and layer.
Right. From a little more bigger macro version of things. So ArchiSense as a studio is a fairly young studio, and most designers always aspire to and always want to work towards having their own studio. But obviously, that's not the most easiest thing to do. That I'm sure there's a lot of challenges that the both of you have faced while not just setting up, but even running the studio. So maybe for our audience, if you can go through a few of those challenges and how you guys overcame that.
I realized that not nothing is impossible. You just need to maybe simplify things. If it's something that you don't have a fully experience on it, I think you can still do it. You just need to simplify things and maybe breaking down to different group of people and not to expect to do everything on your own. So having said that, collaborating with different design people, like different design consultant when it comes to engineering or even the design itself, the design sector itself, to breaking down to different people, I think you can still run that. And if you are just sure that you're working with good people and right people and you have that trust and expectation, I think it's easy to achieve still a coherent project together.
Right.
So for us, it was something similar that we started to ask people to help us in this journey and try to add value to it and try to learn from each other, basically. And of course, this doesn't mean that if you're working with a good MEP team or engineering, you have nothing to do. No, again, there is so much loads of work for you in terms of, again, coordination, making sure that everything is going through what you're expecting.
Absolutely.
And apart from that, I think another thing that is important is to have your right team and studio, people that you are daily working with. And I think you know this better, that when it comes to this such studio and work environment, there is no hierarchy really in positions or the scope of work or who's doing what. It's like you take a project, you try to make it fate in that project and try to do as much as possible you do your best, because the work of individual would be very important and vital in that process in succeeding of the project, and very dependent at the same time. So that's why you need to make sure that you have the people that you can trust on their work attitude, on their friendship, and the way they would feel responsible, that they would not, leave you halfway of the project. And because you cannot blame on anyone.
True, because at the end of the day, you are, like you said earlier, kind of like the director of the movie, you kind of as the architect are that.
Yes.
Right.
So the difficult job would be to manage that, to manage this team in order to have everything perfectly in this scene to work together. So there is the managing of team, and at the same time there is managing the project, and on the other hand there is managing the subconsultant, the contractor, and the project managing from construction time to delivery even.
And adding to what Raha is saying is like understanding the clients. Like we started at a very young age, and understanding the clients, knowing what their needs are. This was also like a process and an experience that we gained by time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think understanding the contractors was another challenge, like how to communicate with those contractors. That by itself needs an experience.
That's something which firms with 100 years of experience, they still struggle with something like that.
Yes.
So it's again back to the team, because the contractor is part of your team. You need to spend time, I think, in this practice and along while you're doing design, to study all those things, to know the contractors, to know the good suppliers, to know the good fit-out company, and try to make that communication with them, that you can be convincing enough for your client to work with them and sign off the project with them.
Providing a good service. Service is important. How you can let your client trust you. As you know, that there are a lot of designers here in the market, young designers, boutiques, that they are all considered as a competitor.
True.
So I think service is an important factor that I think helped us, and that make your work to stand out, to be unique.
Okay.
Yes.
And for me, also another thing, because I was also totally from a different background as an Iranian, the way I perceive family house, family villa. So I think, I'm graduated from AUS, so we have totally different mindset.
Right.
There's no rationality, basically. But I think you need to make this effort in your practice to really understand the region, the culture, the families, and somehow again translate your ideas, the way you perceive things into something that would fit for everyone.
I think that's quite interesting. I never really thought of that because again, someone like myself, I've pretty much spent my entire life here. So for me, it comes a little more easier, but I'd be interested to know. So how are you when you sort of, with the very strong Iranian context that you come with into a market like this, what are your kind of insights that you've noticed? What do clients kind of want here or they should want here, which you think maybe they're not doing?
I think I understood that maybe there is preconception of the established culture here, that we think that this is something that is solid and everything needs to be respected to that.
Right.
But I think it's not like that. And like, especially in this region, Dubai or UAE, they are in a very constant changing time.
True.
Especially nowadays that there is this social media, you basically now people want to live in so many different times, in so many different contexts and countries at the same time.
Right.
So I would say the culture is now a very fluid thing. It's a very fluid phenomenon that you cannot really say that this is the style of architecture, this is the typology of architecture that should happen in this region. No, I think what should happen is that try to sort it out things, try to again know the challenge or the struggles that families are facing with. Again, back to that transition from family houses to their private villas. And again, back to that reinterpreting of that vision to the new experience of, spaces. I think that is the difficult part.
Right.
And because at the end of the day, culture is not a constituted paradigm and it can change from a family to another family. And of course, especially in Middle East, I would say that people are in this challenge of, reinterpretation of their needs and their values and lifestyles. So it's something that would influence them in even the way they want their house to be.
Right.
So we as an architect, I think we need to be in charge of just directing that in a way that could be more rational and design oriented. And of course, like you would follow your design principles or the way you perceive your project. But at the end of the day, it's a family house. It needs to satisfy the family.
Right.
And you as a designer. But it would be the family culture that would make your project different from the other family. For example, we worked on 2 villas that they were for 2 brothers that they came from same parent house.
Yeah.
But because of their stories and their personal values, it ended up with 2 different projects. For example, for one, the privacy is different, like the way he perceives is so different than the other one. The values that they care to be taken into consideration is different. Yeah. So that would be basically the inspiring point, I think, for us to start your design on.
No, I think that's quite interesting because we as a firm have a very similar client to like yours actually, who's basically 3 villas with the parents and 2 brothers that are developing their villas in these 3 plots. And I think what you said is very interesting because all 3 villas in a sense have a common language through them, but visually, aesthetically, because of different sort of client aspirations, they're very dramatically different from each other. Although, like you said, it's pretty much the same family. They've definitely grown up together and all of that. But it's interesting how those projects look nothing alike and kind of like how they're treated, which I think is quite interesting. I've never really thought of that before. It's pretty cool. It's good insight.
Yes. I think it's like when it comes to design principle, you can manage what you're asking for. Like maybe you want, this is intentionally, you want them to look the same, not literally, but you can read them similar. You can read that connection that they are somehow related.
Right.
But again, maybe when you go inside, when you try to experience the spaces, going through the project, you can automatically, I think, imagine a different life experience there that you can exactly. And if you know the family very well, you would say exactly that I can imagine this house for this family, and I can imagine this house for this family.
Right.
Because sometimes you go to, some project that you cannot really relate the project to the family that them.
Right. True. Makes a lot of sense. I kind of, because you as a studio also do interiors along with architecture, I kind of want to know maybe from the both of you, clients now that are sort of coming to you for projects, in terms of finishes, what are the kind of materiality, that they're looking at? Because, there's always been a trend of, marble and granite and so on. But is that the same now, or is that changing? Are they wanting different things? How is that kind of looking?
In our projects, we use different types of materials. As you know, materiality in bringing a project to life is a really significant component in architecture, interior design, as well as landscape.
Right.
It complements the volumetric form of the building, engage users, and give depth and richness to both architecture and interior.
Right.
And as you know, nowadays, due to the recent advance in digital fabrication and digital science, we are not limited to specific type of materials. We have wide access to different range of mediums.
Right.
For example, we really like to work with Petriviva. It's a company in Dubai. They have let's say a type of a stone with 10 different type of finishes. It's really interesting to see one stone in 10 different finishes.
Wow.
So we like working with them and exploring with them, giving them ideas, trying different patterns. And back to our own practice here in ArchiSense, we always try to let building form speak by utilizing and studying materials, connecting exterior with interior, creating a cohesive space. As you have seen on our Instagram page, we are really careful of how to use material, what material is in the interior and what is there in exterior, how they are connected, to use materials that are calming to eyes and neighbors.
Right.
And again, you need to take care when you use material that this house is going to be there for a long period of time. It's not just 10 years. It's 20, 30 years. They are going to stay at that house and live.
Absolutely.
So it should be pleasing and good durable materials.
Definitely.
If you want to add.
In specific to clients, we are lucky that we have such clients that they have good eye in design, and they're not very demanding in a way that just asking you to use this specific sort of material or a finish. But we like to explore different types of material in different projects. So, for example, sometimes we have clients that they are okay with the whiteness of the space and having the white as much as you want. So there's no for them. And there's another client that maybe in the beginning, he's asking for more natural type of finishes, more earthy kind of vibe in the project. And then from there, we try to carry on.
Right. Okay. Then maybe another aspect that I want to touch upon, which again is common to both architecture, interiors, even landscaping to an extent, is lighting. Lighting is obviously a very important thing, both natural lighting, natural daylight, and of course, actual, fixture selection and so on. Again, from that point of view, how are you finding clients with their requirements now? Are they kind of pushing for more natural daylight? Are they relying more on, sort of artificial light? Or do they not care? I'm just trying to understand where they are when it comes to lighting.
I think now they are getting more interested in getting more natural light, whether it's direct or indirect, asking for skylights or more glass, see-through surfaces in the project. But when it comes to artificial light, I think they're not very acknowledged in how flexible artificial light could be. Because back to very original contemporary project here, we just see just one type of downlight as a spotlight, which is full of them in one ceiling.
Right.
Whereas you see there are so many different types of lighting when it comes to the fixture or the functionality, or how you can, depending on the shape of it or the way it's installed, you can use it so differently. And it could be definitely a part of interior design element that you can use it and expand it throughout the whole project. That would be one of the very important elements in interior, because the lighting is is not only for the matter of function or for the matter of it's the location, it's on the ceiling. When there is a light, when there is a specific lighting, the projection of that light would emphasize on how you frame and wall of elevation,
right,
or the ground, and so many other surfaces.
Absolutely.
Or it's like a circulation. Like if you're using a very specific type of light or the shape, like a linear light, it would emphasize the idea of the continuity that you want to emphasize on.
So I think for us, like lighting is a connector component between architecture and interior. And like adding to what Raha said, yes, we do use a lot of like daylight, like trying to introduce daylight. And beside that, we always try to have light consultancy on board with us.
Okay.
Like as John Cullen is one of the companies that we like to deal with and like to study the plans and the elevations, how we can enhance the lighting in the project and what type of light fixtures we can use that is pleasant to eye as well.
Right.
Because it was one of those studies that we started in the beginning to work on that, how we can minimize the number of lights in ceilings.
Yes.
Basically.
Yes.
Instead of having 10 spotlights.
It's 100, not 10. 100 spotlights in a plan.
3.
Right.
And then this would happen when you talk to the specialist. So you understand, depending on the fixture and the specification, you can manage them.
Absolutely.
Like, you can manage that. But of course, it again depends on if your client to be willing about that or not to, because then there is the budget as well. So here they think that, okay, the light fixture is something that would come very at the end. So you just buy one type of spotlight
from Dragon Mart
or whatever. And it's done.
We love Dragon Mart, but still, I know.
Yeah.
That is what happens, unfortunately. Yeah.
And I think it's changing. So it's because of, I think another thing that would help in that transition is home automation. I think that it's kind of pushing the things to be on the right, on the right spot.
Right.
Because in home automation, I think there's no point if there's no variety in light, in intensity, in like the hue or like the location or anything. Yeah.
I think multiple things there. So firstly, yes, lighting selection is very important about your fixtures and so on. But I also think actual lux values also are really important, because something as simple as, your standard sort of beige travertine would look very different under different levels of lux.
Exactly.
So even it sort of impacts your finishes, not even, the overall aesthetic per se. And I think having specialists on board is ideal. I think initially it's always quite difficult to sell it to client. Lighting typically is, lighting and landscape maybe are the first things that get value engineered out of, a residential project. But it's always good to have clients who want that, because then you can clearly see, the difference in what is delivered with the scope and what is delivered without the scope. And unfortunately, Dragon Mart does seem to be the place where most people end up.
Because you need to evaluate your project when light is on and when light is off.
Right.
And of course, when light is off, everything would be, I think, more pleasant. Like the errors doesn't show when it comes to lighting, a sense of it on its own.
Right.
So it would be more like layout kind of thing. But I think when you switch it on, that should be a success too.
Absolutely. So, clearly the both of you know what you guys are doing when it comes to residential design. For our listeners who are tuning in, if you can maybe distill that down into a top 3 or top 5 or how many ever you want, basically, just kind of key points to consider when designing residential buildings or residential private homes and so on. I know we touched upon, understanding your client and getting a good brief. But in addition to that, because as you know, most of our audience are kind of junior to mid-level, and maybe they've not worked on a residential project before, and maybe they might get one. So for them, what would be the kind of top things for them to consider?
I think if it comes to design, interior design itself, like the first thing would be hierarchy. Try to prioritize your main spaces, main functions, main walls, and to know the potentiality of each spaces that you want to give more attention to.
Right.
And the second thing would be balance, that the balance could be happen when you do that hierarchy, when you try to prioritize, and just to make sure that nothing is overpowering like the other. So things needs to be designed in a way that they complement each other, not compete, or not to disrespect or not suffocate each other. And the way we work in interior spaces, we try to really find that balance. I think to find that very fine line between something that is overdone and something that is good enough and pleasant is something challenging, that especially in interior design is something that needs to be well studied.
Right.
And the third one, I would say consistency. So when you start with the initial stages of the design, you need to have this clear idea of how you want to treat the walls or the space, any sort of design discipline, and try to duplicate that treatment throughout the project. And when you see that project, when you go into each spaces, looking at each wall individually, that would all give you one reading from the whole project. So in order to not to break down the project into so many different pieces that are irrelevant, that could be more like comprehensive in a way that they are very dependent to each other. And if you remove something, it would damage the rest, the rest. Because here, especially in residential project, I think use of material, too much, would ruin everything.
You need to have a control over it.
Control over it, that you can appreciate every element individually.
Right.
And adding to what you said, I think architecture should follow, or let's say interior design should follow architecture. And then another thing is to consider budget. Budget for a residential project is the most important element. If you don't have the budget and you're talking about traveling team, then there is no use. It's waste of time, basically.
Right. And budget would happen if you have a good understanding of materiality and finishes. So you can know how you can replace some stuff or not to think of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And then I think also involving a designer is really important. And again, if you are hiring a designer, it's good to trust the designer.
Yeah.
So this is my advice to clients, to trust their designers.
Right.
Yes.
Absolutely. Kind of as my final question for this episode, which is something which I am, sort of thinking a lot about of late, is, Raha, like you said, the whole designer becoming an entrepreneur. Most designers are good designers, obviously, but not all designers are good entrepreneurs, in the sense that to actually run a practice, you need obviously a completely different, set of skills and so on. You need to at least understand, basic accounting and, creating an invoice and getting paid and maintaining cash flow and so on, which are things which most designers maybe have not learned about or don't know about, for example. So kind of addressing a practice, addressing a studio. As a designer, how do you go about learning that? Is it something that just comes from experience, or do you actually go out and actively try to learn more about it? How does that happen?
I think we are lucky that we are two, not one.
Right.
Yeah, so we can divide work.
Right. And we come from a background where they were into my father, he's an entrepreneur. So it's easy to go back to him and ask him about some technical issues.
Right.
And this has helped us. Again, with Raha, the same. I think her father as well, as an entrepreneur, has helped us as well.
In the
his experience
stages.
Yes.
But now, the way we work, Maryam is taking more the management part of the practice. I'm more part of design.
Right. So there's a managing director and there's a creative director.
Yes.
Yeah, sort of. But in a way, yes, we if there's something that we need to outsource, we outsource. If there's something that we need to study, for example, I took a course in project management. So you still need to keep up in learning, and this changes as you move on, because you understand what is not working in your practice, what is lacking here, or what is that you're doing maybe wrong, and you need to improve when it comes to the management. Then it's something that I should spend time more on it and fix it.
Right.
And I think that is initial, because it would help again for you in terms of the profit, the client coordination, and the timeline of the project. So many things.
Interesting. All right. Well, there you go. I think if anyone sees your work, I think your work shows a lot of potential already. And considering in the grand scheme of things, ArchiSense is still a fairly young studio. So I think the future just has a lot more exciting things. And we're really excited to see as a studio what you guys put out next. If any of our listeners want to get in touch with you, or if suppliers hear this and they want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to reach you?
They can reach us through our Instagram and website or the contact number.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, on that note,
we're more happy to collaborate to everyone.
Awesome. That's what we want to hear in the design community. That's kind of the entire reason why this podcast is even there. We're all about collaboration. I think the more that we collaborate rather than compete, I think our lives are going to be a lot better.
People can influence each other.
Absolutely.
That's a good thing, I think.
Yeah.
You need to, it shouldn't be very linear.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. So on that note, Raha, Maryam, thank you so much for coming on the show. And we're definitely going to have you back on again very soon. And for the rest of you guys, we will catch you guys next week.
Fellow aFormers, thank you guys for listening. Thank you guys for being part of our journey. And thank you for the immense support we've been receiving for our episodes. It has and continues to be a very bumpy road, but we wouldn't want it any other way. If you enjoyed this episode and it brought you value, please share this episode with anyone who may benefit from it. But of course, if you loved the episode, follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn, send us a little DM, and we may just send you a secret link to a secret episode which we've been working on. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. See you next time. Keep sketching.